How can we make the United Nations more effective?
First of all, membership must be universal.
I think that is a very difficult question. From the Korean point of view, an effective UN should have been able to unite Korea.
I think we can make the United Nations more effective by providing more economic aid to the underdeveloped countries.
I think the most important way would be trying to harmonize different ideologies instead of propagandizing them.
We've been greatly assisted in preparation of the material by the cooperation of scholastic magazines. Now let me introduce to you the high school students from 4 countries who are participants. Johann Holtz from Norway. Johann's here tonight because he started raising such fundamental questions at the very end of last week's program that we had to get him back to try to go into them more thoroughly. Hae-Jun Park from Korea. You'll notice a slight American accent. He acquired that by association with American newspaper men in Korea. From India, 16-year-old Chitranjan Kapoor. Chitranjan has been lecturing on Hindu marriage customs in his host school this afternoon. It's not on the agenda tonight, Chitranjan, but perhaps we can devote another of the programs in this series to comparing social customs. Judith Ann Reeder from the United Kingdom. Judith is a member of the Spartan Swimming Club in her native Bournemouth, and I learned that it's only her trip to the United States that kept her from taking a Christmas Day dip in the Atlantic Ocean this year. Now, before we get into the discussion, since you're still in your first term, your first 2 weeks in American high schools, and I don't see much of you, I'd kind of like to know what's been happening to you these weeks, what you've been thinking about. What's on your mind, Judith?
Well, I've been thinking a lot these last few days, especially about the difference between the American system of education and the English way. And the more I think about it, the more convinced I am, I'm sorry, America, the more convinced I am that the English way is better. I know you can't speak generally, but I'm most impressed by the sort of more general subjects they teach in these American schools. I'm very lucky at the moment. I'm at a new school, but I still think that ours trains you better for life.
Well, why, Judith?
Well, in the American school, the emphasis seems to be on training the boy or girl to be a good citizen. Well, that's very, very praiseworthy. And in England, we hope that they'll be good citizens too. But in England, we believe that you must have a thorough grounding in all your subjects. You must, as we call it, do the square bashing before you leave school.
What's square bashing?
Oh, well, that's a most peculiar English term. It's associated with digging up potatoes. It really means that you must get the dirty work done before you can reach to the heights, as you say. And I've noticed in American schools, they don't concentrate enough on, well, I don't think they do, on grammar and the fundamentals of a subject. Whereas in England, we have to spend most of our time doing that. And they think that suits us better for when we leave school.
Well, how about some of the rest of you?
Well, we have been going down to the different classes in the schools, and they have been asking us still questions. I think the questions are very silly. The first thing they ask about that's, have you got any cars in Norway? And I can assure them that we have got some cars. There are not so many as in America, but we have got them anyhow. And then the next question, it's for all the classes, the second question is always juvenile delinquency. How about that thing in Norway? And I can say, well, it's not a problem to the same extent as the United States. As far as I've seen it, I haven't seen it actually when having been here, but I saw it on the picture Blackboard Jungle.
What was the picture?
Blackboard Jungle.
Blackboard Jungle.
Well, yeah, it has been shown in the most European countries and make a lot of impression, I think.
How about some of the rest of you?
I am attending the Massapequa High School. Well, out there, they have got a new building. It was just made in last September. And I think it's a very luxurious one compared to our Indian ones. They got a very big thing. It's about at least 3 or 4 times the size of our Indian ones. And well, inside the classes, I've been moving quite a lot, and I spoke quite a lot about India. But I found out one thing in the classes, that there's a very informal atmosphere inside the classroom. You can't find out who the teacher is. Actually, they all behave in the same way, the teacher as well as the student. They're talking to each other as if they were both studying or if they were both teaching. And I think they certainly overdo it. I mean, by Indian standards, we would say they misbehave. Though I shouldn't say that out here. For example, only yesterday I was attending a class. So out there, one of the boys, he started calling the teacher, "Hey, Mr. Hoyt." So that's like calling a servant back in India.
You wouldn't do that in India.
Oh no, in India we never take the names of our teachers. If we do that, most probably get a beating. I still remember about 4 years back, I went into classroom and my teacher was Mr. Pandey, certain Mr. Pandey. And I went in and said, "Good morning, Mr. Pandey." And it was the first time I had ever taken his name in front of him. And he brought out a cane and gave me such a severe caning that I can never forget that caning. But out here it seems to be a normal thing. But
I don't think you'll see very many people being caned here.
Yeah, it's not so common out there, but they regard it as sort of fundamental thing that we shouldn't take the teacher's name.
How about you, Hejun?
Well, I attended Freeport High School in Long Island. I attended my first class and from Tuesday. And the first thing I was shocked from how the students act and how they carry their books. I mean, they used to carry their books with armful books within, and every 45 minutes they change classes, and
I don't understand what do you do with books if you don't carry them?
we used to have a book. We have a Korean high school students carry books in their bags, but American high school students they carry a book in arms.
I've noticed that too.
And in Korea, teachers move around, but students stay in a class.
Even in
From-
colleges and high schools.
In high schools, yes.
So they do in Norway.
Also, I found that American high school students have a current events class, which I like them very much. And they learned about most of the current events, and they had a current event test in history class.
Hejun, let me ask you, since you're also an Asian, where formality is, or people are perhaps more polite, were you as shocked as Chitranjan was at the way students behave to their teachers?
Also, I was shocked because the teachers act very informally to their teachers.
Any Asian would be.
In Korea, when we speak to teachers, we stand and we very politely report. We speak to our teachers, but American students stand and may I act?
Yes, go ahead. What do they look like to you?
And they act like this. They put their hands in the pocket and they move around.
Well, maybe you'll be a good influence, Hejun, in
I
your
was very
school.
shocked.
But there are good things also. For example, I liked the lunch very much, which was for only 40 cents. I think it's very cheap. If they had the same thing in India, it would be very good.
Did you have to pay for it?
I didn't have to, but all the others had to, and I think it was a very cheap one.
Yeah.
Yesterday I had a lecture for 45 minutes in history class, and they asked me, do you know about rock and roll? Can you answer that? What is rock and roll?
So I do not know, but I know it's a kind of dancing to jazz music. As a matter of fact, one of the students, the South African representative, the first thing he got when he come over here after having stayed there a few days was a crew cut. And he seemed to, he was not satisfied with that. He wanted to be completely Americanized, and he learned to dance jitterbug and so on, like a crazy man, you know, in this way.
The haircut, he got it because it's very expensive out here to get your haircut after.
Maybe that's the reason.
That's why people have crew
It
cuts.
costs at least $1.50 to get your haircut, and then the tip and whatnot.
And Americans are very poor people, you know.
Look, I've got to get on with our discussion question. How can we make the United Nations more effective? Now, I think the first thing we want to do is to get some facts. How about each one of you telling us what you know about the United Nations personally in terms of your own country?
Well, as a matter of fact, Norway is considered to be one of the so-called welfare states. And accordingly, I don't think that we need so much help in the economic help and so on from the United Nations. But of course, all Norwegians, they are conscious about that the United Nations today is our only hope to survive in the atomic age. And accordingly, they think that we all should support the United Nations in a moral way. And as a matter of fact, I've been as lucky as to be in one of the UNESCO classes they have in Norway. They got 3 classes with a special UNESCO program. That's studying international relationships and so on. And in our school we also have a so-called United Nations Club, and I've been a chairman for that for 1 year. And we have got...
You've been the chairman?
Yeah. I have pretended to be, at least.
How about India, Chief?
Well, in India, UNESCO has done quite a bit, but I think it could have done more had it had more funds. See, in India, they gave us $550,000 worth of publications, equipment, and films, and that was under the UNESCO gift coupon scheme. You know, the advantage of that scheme is that the recipients of those coupons, they don't have to pay dollars in hard currency areas.
Do you get these UNESCO pamphlets too in Norway?
Yeah, we get them to an extent that we don't wish to. I see it in this way, that the UNESCO, they must have a kind of a paper mill, not able to stop spewing out those folders and paper things, you know.
What do you mean by spewing out?
They're spewing it out, they can't stop it. They're sending them up to us in heaps. We are getting pamphlets about how naked Indians brush their teeth and so on. I'm quite sure that they might use those money in a better way than sending up such informative materials to Norway.
For example?
Learn the Indians to read.
But you see,
literacy.
If they don't do that sort of thing in the rich countries wouldn't give money.
Well,
they show how bad the conditions are in some countries, and they want you to give more money. But if people like you regard it in that way, I don't think we could succeed.
I think you've been successfully silenced for the moment, Johann. How about Korea?
As far as the UNESCO is concerned, I do not know about activities of UNESCO in Korea. I think UNESCO just started in Korea, but this year. And before I left Korea, I went to an art exhibition which was sponsored by UNESCO.
But what do people in Korea know about the United Nations? How do they view it?
Korean people know about UN well because the United Nations forces fight against communists during Korean War for 3 years. And generally, Korean people are thankful for the United Nations. I mean, what United Nations have been doing. And they usually celebrate United Nations Day colorfully.
What about England, Judy?
Well, we're rather in a similar position to Norway. I think we, except that we don't take the same attitude.
Yeah, that's so good.
We perhaps don't need the help of the Economic and Social Council as India does, obviously. But it's very interesting. We have in England what is known as the Council for the Education in World Citizenship, a rather long name known shortly as the CEWC. And it does a lot of work in the schools there. And it has clubs, rather as I believe Johann has in his schools. And we're very lucky in my school, as a matter of fact. This last summer, we were very privileged to have a conference where we discussed foreign affairs and matters like that. And its whole purpose is trying to get the younger generation of England to realize the importance of the individual in the United Nations. And that is actually how I came over to America. The competition was held by the CEWC. And this last Christmas in England, in London, they had what are known as the Christmas conferences, where thousands of school children gather and discuss political events. And it's very interesting and very stimulating, and I think it does you see, we work in that way. We don't receive help from United Nations. We try and take an active part.
So do we.
Yes, I know.
We don't want all the informative materials. We don't consider it to be informative about knowing that Indians brush their teeth without any clothes on.
Let's go on to the questions, the fundamental questions you raised in your original answers, to try to find out what some of the major problems are that the UN is facing today.
Yeah, I think that we can say, as I said it last time also, that it's something quite new about the United Nations today. They are trying to remove the causes of war. They have inquired into the causes and found out that the war, it is not only a result of differences in ideologies and so on. It's because of the misery of the people. And therefore we have to give the underdeveloped areas, such as India and so on, the help and aid, and in the economic, educational and so on, in that field. And I think that's some of the important thing about United Nations and the sub-agencies are trying to fight against those evils.
You're agreeing with Cheat then that a major problem that the UN has to face now is the matter of economic aid. Would you say that's more important than universal membership that you mentioned?
I think it's the most important problem the United Nations is facing today at all.
Is there any disagreement on this?
Yes, well, half and half. I think that the United Nations has got to do something more fundamental than that. I agree that that work is vital if we're going to have peace.
I think that's a fundamental work.
Well, I don't
Yes,
agree.
it is.
To create
Well,
a foundation
okay.
upon which
Let's
we'll be
hear
able
your
to
point.
create
Yes,
a
but-
dynamic peace.
Yes, but don't you think that's all going to come to a dead stop unless something is done? You know how difficult it is now. Some countries want China to be admitted to the United Nations and some don't. Well, it's all very well to go on doling out social help.
What
and
about
it's
you?
very
You
necessary.
want China to be admitted or not?
Yes, I do.
Oh.
Definitely.
That's
What
Well,
about
don't
you?
you?
Yeah, I want it to be admitted. I said that the most important thing about the United Nations today is that there should be a universal membership, and of course also Red China is included in that.
Just when you just said about economic aid, I think economic aid is very vital, but to me, as in Korea,
Yeah.
Korean boy, I think United Nations should be effective in unifying Korea somehow.
By force?
If we need force, I think that United Nations should use force to unify Korea.
Wouldn't that mean the Third World War and the extinction of mankind?
You know, there are a lot of atom bombs and all the rest now.
Do you think it is that important?
Of course, if we start war right now, that means world war.
Yeah.
But to me, also Koreans hate war. They do not like war.
All human
Yes,
beings
nobody
are supposed to
likes
not like
it.
war.
But here's a great task to unite Korea. We cannot live without North, and North Korea cannot live South.
They prove they have been living through years now,
But
being divided.
yes, it has been divided, but it cannot live permanently.
But you have to solve the problems by degrees, haven't you?
By degrees.
Well, excuse me for interrupting, but I would like to get on, since we've got Chitranjan and you both here, a little more to the question of economic aid and how it can be made more effective. Do you like the way it's being given now? Are we giving enough aid? Is who giving enough aid to whom? What did you mean exactly when you say we can make the UN more effective by more economic aid?
Well, I think that the help must be given through the United Nations and not through the different powers. As it has been today, the help has been given mostly through the United States and through Russia, and then it has been a competition between United States and Russia to give the underdeveloped countries help. That is to increase their influence in those countries. And I think that to decrease the tensions in the world today, all the economic aids should be given through the United Nations.
And actually what I think is that whether the aid comes from separately from Russia and America or whether it comes through the United Nations doesn't matter. But what matters is the amount of that aid, whether that aid will be of benefit to us or not.
Of course it matters from whom to give it, because the underdeveloped countries seems to be so afraid about influence and so on. They are suspicious about foreign aid. They must be aware of the fact that today a stranger is not a synonym for an enemy.
Oh, and at
Judy-
least in India they don't think that a stranger is a synonym for enemy.
Or there seems to be some places.
That's an interesting point you've raised, don't you think, that now the East and West, Russia and America, are sort of fighting between each other. There's
There's
an
a
air of
competition, yeah.
competition. Well, don't you think that's a good
It's
thing?
called-
No,
They're
I
all
don't. It raises
competing.
tensions in the world today.
Oh, I
Oh, it's a
disagree.
sort of
I
healthy
think it
rivalry.
eases tension, yes. And now that these underdeveloped countries are in a much better position now. I mean, instead of begging for our
profit
help.
by a competition, but we
Yes.
must see the world as a whole, and it won't profit by an increase of tensions.
Yes, but it's not tension in a warlike atmosphere,
Yes,
is it now? This is more
it is
business,
tensions.
commerce.
You see the tensions rising. You see the situation in the Middle East. The help has been given first now by the Western powers, and then suddenly Soviet interrupted, and she offered help, and of course the countries wanted that help, and they took it.
But
And-
Johann, excuse me, I think you're confusing two issues. The Middle East was military aid. Now, if I understand what you have been saying, you're saying that economic competition to aid the underdeveloped areas is a healthy rivalry. Isn't that what your point
Yes,
was?
it is a sort of healthy rivalry because both the sides try to win over the friendship of the people, and they know that one way is of giving economic aid. And Well, they try the competition and all. It's we, India, and the rest of the Southeast Asian countries who benefit, because Burma is also getting a bit of aid, and I think after some time, Afghanistan is also getting some aid, and I think after some time, maybe Indonesia or some other countries also get it.
They actually all do get aid, but not to the same extent. And the extent is of course, is rising with the competition arising between West and East, but I don't consider this to be of any good. I consider this to be an evil, because it increases tensions in the world, and an increase of tensions in the world, we can't have any more increase, otherwise the whole world will collapse.
You see,
Do you think then it would be better if this economic and social aid was sort of organized entirely through the United Nations?
I think so, yeah.
Just by one body sort of
Just
doing
by
that?
the whole world. The United Nations is an international organization, and accordingly the whole help should go to that organization.
Okay.
It has been very, I think I don't like the tension that has been to go outside United Nations in solving all the world problems today. They have got the United Nations, and they should make that organization strong enough by letting the things be solved by the United Nations.
but do you know something? See, some time back the Russians promised to give aid to India. They signed up. I think it was about $91 million packed for a steel plant in India at Bhilai. Now, just hardly about a month or two after that, America has promised us $10 million. It wouldn't have done that if Russia hadn't. So there's sort of healthy competition, and the countries benefit by that.
Yes, the countries on the receiving end always benefit. Yes, I agree.
Of course, it's profitable for you, but we must see the world as a whole. And
Not only for us, you see.
Yes, of course, it's for you to get the aid.
But don't you think it makes, it eases tension in the way that, well, I would have thought it would ease tension by making the countries not think in military terms, but want to sort of aid these other countries socially. Surely that does them good without them knowing it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Well, there seems to be an honest disagreement between you as to whether economic aid should be channeled through the UN or whether this, what you call healthy competition,
No,
should
actually,
continue.
I don't mind. I just want to know about the amount of the aid, whether it comes from America
That's
or
the
Russia.
important thing. But let me ask you, are there any other injustices in the world that the UN should be doing something about, in addition to the economic injustice?
First thing, of course, comes up the question of membership. See, the League of Nations failed on this point, that it didn't have universal membership. Some countries did not join it, and some were kept out of it. Now, when the United Nations started, at least it started with the idea of universal membership. Now, after some time, the Republic of China, the new Republic of China, and the lawful government of China, it was excluded from that, and it has not been recognized by some countries. It's not been represented in the United Nations. That's a very great injustice being done to the people. Actually, it's not a question of whether we like a government or whether we don't like a government. The fact is that it exists, and it has to be recognized like that. And
Hey, Joan, you're looking skeptical.
I agree with you.
To Franjan, do you mean that the Red China should be admitted to
Oh,
the
yes.
United Nations?
I think it should be.
Why?
I told you the reason just now, you see.
Because the government in Peking is a de facto government of the Red China today, and we have to consider facts, first of all.
Also, I want to ask you a question.
Oh, yes,
And,
do by all means.
That's why you are here.
do you think that the North Korea should be admitted to the United Nations?
Oh, no, I
No,
don't
no.
think it should be until it is united with South Korea and both of them apply together for membership of the United Nations.
To me, and China, the problem in China and problem in Korea are same thing.
Of course, but you have to work by degrees. If you once have admitted
I
Red
don't
China to the
understand,
United
excuse me.
Nations,
I don't understand
No.
about degrees.
by degrees, by and
But I
by.
mean gradually and
Yeah,
gradually,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
And then if you once have admitted Red China to the United Nations, then it's a possibility that they can sit down and discuss the problems.
To me, the aggressive nation, not the peace, the country which does not love peace should not be admitted to the United Nations.
How do you
That's the
say,
only
how do you say
obligation
it does
stated
not
in the-
love peace? It
Just
does
a
love
minute.
peace.
In 1945, since 1945, the communists tried to conquer the whole mainland of China. And as soon as they finished the conquering,
See,
Civil
the
war.
fact is that
just a
the
minute
government
now.
is there. Whether
Now, they got support from Russia. In 1948,
But
what
Chiang
they-
Kai-shek got support from the United States.
yes, they did.
See, look, compare
No,
the
wait,
Wait,
area.
let me
let him
finish,
finish,
Brahma.
Chief.
Okay.
In 1949, They, North Koreans got help from Russia, and next year they invaded South Korea.
Yes, but don't you think that a lot of this tension, the United Nations has branded Red China, hasn't
Yes.
it, as an aggressor?
Yes.
But don't you think Red China considers itself an aggressor simply because it is excluded from, well, not simply because, but partly because it's excluded from the
Yeah,
United
I do
Nations?
think so.
It feels it's got to be on the attack
Don't you
because
think-
the whole of the United Nations countries seem to be against it.
Yeah, it's been
You see,
treated
when
very
you-
badly in the world
Yes.
by
Yeah.
the other
Judith,
countries.
excuse me for interrupting. We've only got a couple more minutes. Do you want to say one more word on the point you made at the beginning?
Yes, I would like to say one thing. We seem to think that the communists, just because they're communists and they have ideological differences, we seem to think that we just can't agree with them. But I think in order to have peace, we've got to somehow make a compromise. By making a compromise, it doesn't mean that we agree with them or that we suddenly turn communist. But you see, I don't believe the Russian people fundamentally are as communistic as their leaders would like us to believe. I mean, they're not allowed to hold free elections, are they?
No.
Doesn't that
No.
point out
See,
somehow?
but that is one of the basic things of communism.
Yes.
I know that communism is a totally bad thing. I don't agree with its ideas at all. But you see, it is one of the basic things of communism.
Yes,
And
that's
if they have free elections, that means they're going
That's why
against
their
communism.
communists are totalitarian.
Yes, but I don't believe half the people in Russia
I don't
are
think we
China.
should discuss the communist ideology. I don't think it's on the topic. We have to consider
But
facts.
Judith's point,
Yes,
I
but
think,
you
that
see-
she made so eloquently at the beginning was that rather than having the UN as a place to propagandize rival ideologies,
Yeah.
it ought to be some place where one could harmonize them.
They've
Oh,
got
yeah,
to
of
forget they're communists for the time being.
Yeah, I agree with you
Yes.
completely.
Communists or no communists, work for peace or to progress.
They're all human beings, you know.
I think our time is getting very rapidly to a close. Is there any final thing anybody wants to say?
Yeah, I would like to say that today it's only because of the United Nations that we have succeeded in avoiding a third world war. And as long as the United Nations exists as a body, I don't think it has failed.
I fully support you.
Well, I think that's a very good note to end on. And in trying to look at this question, how can the United Nations be made more effective, I think you've helped us all, both by giving the way in which people in your country regard the UN, what the UN is doing in your countries, and the various solutions you've suggested, among them universality of membership and channeling economic aid through the United Nations. It seems to me that you've given us not only alternatives, but some solutions to the question we asked at the beginning: how can the UN be made more effective? Thank you all, and be back with us again next week.
This has been The World We Want, a program featuring students from 33 countries from the 4 corners of the earth. They are spending 3 months in the United States as delegates to the 10th Herald Tribune Forum for High Schools. This program is presented in the public interest by the New York Herald Tribune in cooperation with the Educational Television and Radio Center. Decor for this program was loaned by the Maya Company, New York.